What up, Wizards? It's Dev. Yes, he, of the place. And yeah, we all see it. The mic is in the shot. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be this way forever. I'm just trying something new, see if the audio's any better this way. Let me know how you feel about it, but one way or the other, everything's going to be okay. You're not here for spatial audio theory. You're here for them sweet new cap spoilers. We got a bunch of good ones today. Close to 25 new cards, and about as many uncommons and commons I'd like to go over as we have rares and mythics, and all of them I think worth talking about in terms of constructed playability. Well, not all of them. Most of them. Almost all. But let's go ahead and get into it, so we really don't have much time to waste. Alright, the first thing I want to bring up is the reprint of Suspicious Bookcase, even though this is a good example of a card that's usually not worth talking about in constructed play, at least not historically, but it is neat and limited usually. It's just a 2-mana artifact creature, it's 0/4, you can pay 3 mana and tap it, and one of your guys is unblockable this turn. Neat little thing that sometimes ends games in limited, but never goes beyond that format. I've always, though, been a big fan of the flavor of this card, and I think flavor-wise this is a great set to work it in, so here's a reprint of Suspicious Bookcase. I'm probably the only one that's ever going to talk about it. So let's move on to an all-new card. This is Hypnotic Grifter, and if you expect me to single out some online personality or another, I'm not going to. I'm sorry if that disappoints you, but Grifter is just 1 blue mana for a 1/2 human rogue. You pay 3 to have it connive. Now, that is draw a card, discard a card, so loot, and if you loot a non-land into your yard doing this, Grifter gets +1/+1. So over a game of limited, this could get relatively big and help draw you towards that big bomb. Maybe you have ways to reanimate stuff. So I don't know. It's probably okay as a 1-drop in that format, but again, never will see play outside of that format. So let's move on to Arc Splitter, a card that I am actually a little too excited about. This is just 1 mana for an artifact. It's an equipment, and it only equips for 1. Equipped creature has, pay 1. So this card's nickel and diming you. Paying 1 mana a lot, but when you do pay 1, the creature deals a damage to a creature that is blocking it. This is actually really interesting to think about in like a Finn the Fangbearer deck, right? The Death Touch deck. Because your guys are nigh unblockable if you have this equipment on them, right? Anything that's blocking it is going to die before it even gets a chance to do damage to your Finn or whatever Death Touch dude you have. So really neat to think about in that deck, and it's good with like first strike and double strike guys too. So, I mean, some creatures, if you have enough mana, I mean, you untap, you draw your card, and you go directly to combat. You got all your mana open. I mean, again, your dude's basically unblockable, because if a 4/4 or a 5/5 blocks it, you can still effectively cut that whole creature down before it ever gets to deal damage to your dude. So I think this is actually really neat. Probably not worth the opportunity cost in most constructed decks to include it in the first place, but it definitely slots directly into the poison counter deck in Standard. And we'll see if it makes anything work there, although I doubt it. It's probably going to be a huge pain for most opponents to deal with, so I like this thing. But let's move to Security Bypass here. This is just 1 and a blue for an aura that enchants a creature. As long as enchanted creature is attacking alone, it can't be blocked. Enchanted creature has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, it connives. So this is not Curiosity, not even close to a Curiosity, but it is actually kind of really neat, right? I mean, just putting this on a big dude is tempting enough. 2 mana for can't be blocked, again, as long as it attacks alone, is actually kind of, it makes you think, just in and of itself. 2 mana for that's not terrible, but, you know, being able to connive, you basically get like a suspicious stowaway of sort of build your own suspicious stowaway. And I've always liked that card. So I don't know. I am kind of a fan of this, although, you know, all the negative things that come with auras. You don't want to get 2 for 1 and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I think this could be really good fuel. Again, draw you towards the important cards while putting other important cards in the bin for later use, making the creature bigger as time goes on. And it keeps getting bigger. It can't be blocked. That seems like it's probably relevant. So I don't know. I like a lot about this little aura here. Up next is Forge Boss. This is 4 mana, 2 a black and a red for a 3/4 human warrior. Whenever you sacrifice 1 or more other creatures, Forge Boss deals 2 damage to each opponent. Of course, this ability only triggers once each turn, but I don't think that takes all of the fun out of this card. Now, 4 mana is a lot. That's so much. That's my real problem with this. I think the casting cost makes this definitely not, you know, Blood Artist or Zulaport Cutter and other creatures like this. I really would like a creature in Standard that we can sacrifice dudes, deal damage to our opponent, just Kill them that way. That'd be sweet. And this is sort of that, but not. It's not that. It's not like a Mayhem Devil or anything like that. It's just not even close to what we really need to make this Aristocrats deck work. But if it's all we have, we'll definitely take it. 2 damage a turn is still pretty good, and we get to proc it on our opponent's turn, so it's actually 4 damage per turn cycle. And that is not terrible, right? When you're sacrificing, 1/1 tokens to Oni Cold Anvil and stuff, and procking it that way. So I don't hate this card, and again, I don't think that the once per turn restriction on it really kills it that much. And obviously, if you have multiple copies of it out, it's doing a lot of work for you. So I'm going to try this card, but once a turn it doesn't completely kill it, but it does obviously hurt. And the 4 mana hurts. So I don't have exactly like high hopes for it, but I do think that it's just good enough that I want to try it out. So it's worth talking about. Exotic Pets is next. I like this card a lot more. This is 3 mana. 1 and Azorius, blue-white. For an instant, I think that's key here, create 2 1/1 blue fish creature tokens with this creature can't be blocked. Then, for each kind of counter among creatures you control, put a counter of that kind on either of those tokens. So, neat little thing here. If you have like a Luminarch Aspirant on turn 2, then you get an extra counter on one of your pets, I guess, on the next turn when you play this at instant speed. So it's kind of like a Born to Drive or an Omen, the White Omen? I always forget what it was called. One way or the other. We have gotten more used to these days. These instant speed things create 2 guys, cost 3 mana. You see a pair of goblins in Standard, that does it as well. We used to have things like Raise the Alarm that did it for 2 mana. Apparently that's too good. Somehow that's too good. But, these 3 mana, instant speed, make 2 guys things have seen some extremely sparing play in the past. Now, the Omen saw some play mostly because it was an enchantment. It was card type, and that procced other things. The Scribe was important for control decks. The Life was important for control decks. This doesn't do any of that, and it's harder to cast, so I don't like it as much as some of these other 3 mana instant speed make 2 guys spells. But in just the right deck, getting a token with flying or a token with death touch or something like that could actually be really interesting. And there's some really weird counter types in Standard right now that you could probably combo with this to wacky effect. I don't think very great effect in terms of like power level, but still neat to think about. And I think it's a cool card one way or the other. But this is where the commons and uncommons take a turn into some really neat stuff. Let's look next at Quasar? Ketsa, maybe? Augur of Agonies. I think it's Ketsa. I think you're supposed to think of like the Mesoamerican Thunderbird god thing. But anyway, nerd linguistic theory. Ketsa is 1 a white and a black, Esper colors, for a 3/4 legendary Cephalid Advisor. You gotta love that cephalids are here. But the text box is really neat. Whenever you draw a card, target opponent loses 1 life, and you gain a life. So a funky, sort of pseudo Underworld Dreamsy kind of thing. It's just a really cool card that could potentially lead to some really balmy wins. Right? You just play this, and then the next turn you start drawing all the cards. Problem is, your opponent usually has a turn to kill it before you really get to do anything very cool with it on curve. You might have ways, like a Planeswalker or something. Turn 3 Kaito Shizuki into this. And then you get to drain them 1 when you plus your Kaito. So, I don't know. There's some cool stuff about it. It works really well in a set with Connive, right? Because that's a free way. Attack with a creature that connives when it attacks. Perhaps. Right, so there's some cool stuff about Ketsa that I like a good bit, but again, the 4 mana casting cost on this, the ability to just kill it on sight before it really gets to do anything cool, are things that I think do put a damper on the card. I think it's an awesome commander, though. Let me point that out. I think it's a great commander. I can't wait to do some dirty stuff with. Even in Brawl and stuff, it's probably going to be fun to play, but I doubt this sees all the Standard play in the world at the end of the day, but it is a card that I really, really, really like. Now, another uncommon legend that we actually ended up missing the other day is the one from the Maestros Guild. This is Cormele, Glamour Thief, 1 and then Grixis colors, blue, black, and a red, for a 2/4 legendary vampire rogue with haste. Now, This has some funky abilities. This is just pay 1 and tap it to add Grixis. Spend this mana only to cast instant and or sorcery spells. When Cormele Glamour Thief dies, return up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Now this, for some reason, as an old school Magic player, this reminds me of a card that would have been in Legends. Like a really powerful card that would have been in Legends. But for some reason, just the abilities do line up. The abilities are synergistic. I'm not saying they aren't. But it's just like, when you first read it, it just seems like a bunch of stuff on one card. But there's a lot to it, right? A 4 mana haste 2/4 is not great in and of itself, but when you consider that you can immediately use her to kind of get back some of the mana that you spent on her, or maybe you play her on your turn 4 at sorcery speed, right? But then, or turn 5, you have to do this on turn 5 with 5 lands, but you play her with 1 mana up, effectively. And then you get to play, you know, a removal spell, or perhaps a counter spell or something, to protect her from removal or whatever, or to, you know, still get some juice out of that turn. When you play her for, you know, 5 mana, when you play her for 4 with 1 mana up, you're kind of getting like 8 mana value out of this card. Which is really very good. I think you're actually getting like 7 mana value out of this card. And that's great. So I like that. Again, I like that in a control deck, you can basically spend your turn 4. You can tap out on turn 4, or 5, really. You can tap out on turn 5, to keep reminding myself. And still kind of not have tapped out, right? You still have access to the instant speed stuff in your hand. So I think that's actually going to matter a good bit. And the fact that when she dies, she replaces herself, also great. Replace herself with a sweeper or a counterspell, draw cards, whatever. Doesn't matter. Also very good. So I really like this, and I think that it actually might have a bit of a chance, but we'll see if the impact is actually a little bit lower than I think it is. Another Grixis uncommon that we missed the other day that I really like is Corpse Appraiser. This is just a blue, a black, and a red for a 3/3 vampire rogue. So a decent rate, decent creature types already, but the text box, this is where it's at. When Appraiser enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target creature card from a graveyard. If a card is put into exile this way, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may put one of those cards into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So first of all, it's a graveyard. So if your opponent has a creature, awesome. But you have a chance here of casting Strategic Planning on a 3 mana 3/3 with relevant creature types. That's so good. To me, you know, putting the creatures or putting the extra cards into your graveyard could be very relevant depending on what your strategy is. Just putting a body on the battlefield to trade in combat while doing that could be great for your Reanimator deck, right? So a 3/3 threat that can either attack or block, both of those things are good to be able to do. A 3/3 body is pretty beefy. That's where things start getting beef. So, you know, nothing to sneeze at on the body. And again, you also get the best card from the top 3 and dump the other 2 in your graveyard for later reanimation or whatever. So just, I keep basically describing the card, but that's because, like, I think in this case, just describing what the card does explains why the card is good. So it may be a little bit difficult to cast, and it may even in some cases be difficult to actually proc the card. And if you're just casting a difficult to cast vanilla 3/3, that's bad. So you have to proc the card to make it good at all. But I don't think that should be too difficult. You know, Graveyard Trespasser procs all the time on turn 3 in this format. So being able to immediately replace itself with the best card from the top 3 is just unbelievable. I really, really like this card. The last couple of uncommons and commons of the day, but I think they're definitely the best. Let's look at a common next. Rafine's Informant. Just 1 and a white for a 2/1 human wizard, and when it enters the battlefield, it connives. This is just awesome. I really, really like this. Now, there have been, you know, blue creatures before that ETB and loot and just haven't been incredible, right? But in this case, I want to compare this to, say, a Merfolk Branchwalker. And it's like a Merfolk Branchwalker where you get to do both, right? You get to draw the card. It doesn't even have to be a land. You have to get rid of a card, but still, you get to draw the card and you get a 3/2 in most cases. So, even if you discard a land and all you get is a 2/1, you still drew a card, and that's phenomenal. I think this is probably better than Professor of Symbology. In most cases, it's often going to be better to blink than Professor. It's going to be better in Reanimator most of the time than Professor. Looting is going to be better than Rummaging, even if you're, if that's what you're doing with Professor, rather than going and getting a lesson from your sideboard. So I think this card is probably going to end up seeing some amount of play. I think that the decks that play it are going to be like very specific, but compared to just like Spirited Companion, you know what I mean? It's kind of hard to say which is better. Obviously, decks that want enchantments play Spirited Companion. Decks that want to not have to discard a card play Spirited Companion. But there's plenty of decks that I think would much rather play this. So, big fan in a lot of ways of what this card is doing. Also a wizard, which is a relevant creature type in some ways, party and all that stuff. But let's move on to another 2-mana white creature. This one an uncommon, and I think maybe the best lower rarity card of the day, all things considered. Illuminator Virtuoso, a name that I really like. This is just 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 1/1 human rogue with double strike. Whenever Illuminator Virtuoso becomes the target of a spell you control, it connives. So I keep saying this a lot lately, but is this possibly the best fencing ace of all time? Just the best 2 mana 1/1 double strike. They keep making these better. And I think that this is unbelievable. It's just kind of stupid how good this is with just like a Homestead Courage, You cast Homestead Courage twice for just 2 mana. You've then gotten to loot twice. You get to throw stuff into your graveyard. You've targeted this twice, so it's gotten bigger. If you throw meaty stuff into your graveyard, non-lands into your graveyard, you're putting +1/+1 counters on it from the Conniving, but you're also putting +1/+1 counters on it from the Homestead Courage. So, you could make this thing like a 5/5 on turn 3 if I'm mathing correctly. And I think I am. So, that's really, really silly. The whole time you could be throwing more flashback stuff in your yard to target it with later, Just a very sick looking little duder here, and it works very well with stuff besides just Homestead Courage, One of the budget cards in this format that I've had a lot of fun with in the last 6 months or so is the 2-mana Drake that draws a card whenever you target it with something. That's good in blue-green, it's good in blue-white, it's good in Bant. So, been having a lot of fun with that card, and this card reminds me of that card, just probably better because it also, self-enables, gets bigger as the game goes on. Drops stuff in your graveyard you can draw later, which the Drake doesn't do, or you can use later. So this card looks so amazingly good. Drops right into the, instance and sorcery, the sort of mono white spells deck that's tried to be a thing now for almost the last year. So just so much to say about this card. I think it's great on rate. Could again be the best fencing ace of all time. Just equipped, this thing is amazing. So I just love it. If I haven't made myself very clear, this is the last lower rarity card of the day, but I think it's much better than some of the rares we're about to look at. Like, for instance, our first rare of the day, Cemetery Tampering. I asked on Twitter what people thought the best, quote-unquote, the last card of the video was going to be. Somebody said Cemetery Tampering, and I hope they were memeing. This is 3 mana. I do like this card, don't get me wrong, but we'll talk about it. 3 mana, 2 and a black for an enchantment with Hideaway 5. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may mill 3 cards. Then, if there are 20 or more cards in your graveyard, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. That's okay. So, you pay 3 mana, and it doesn't do anything the turn that you play it. And then the next turn, it doesn't affect the battlefield or the game state, really, in any meaningful way. Doesn't put a creature on the table. Doesn't really draw you a card, technically. I guess you could say that it does, technically. But no, it doesn't. This doesn't really do hardly anything for you, at all. Now, I could see maybe a deck, okay, that wants to play this on turn 3, hide away like a big, juicy, fat boy, right? Just the fattest little princess in the world. And then you turbo mill stuff into your yard, right? That way, by the time it mills on turn 5, say, by the time you get the proc on turn 5, you've got 20 things in your graveyard somehow. Somehow you pull that off. Maybe you have to wait till turn 6, theoretically. And then you can put that big old 7 or 8 drop creature into play that you hit away on turn 3. This all seems very well and good, but then you have to play a bunch of bad cards in your deck that mill you. All the cards in Standard right now that mill you are, I don't want to say bad, but not necessarily optimal most of the time. So I even think the sort of meme deck that this becomes a part of is probably not super great. It can be anything So if they print some dumb 12 mana enchantment in this format, we know there's a thing that costs like 15 mana. Morrow said that in his teaser. There's something that costs like 13 black. So maybe the point is to hide that away with this, and then you cast it for free on like turn 6. Who knows? There could be a combo out there. I could see it, but overall, just in terms of how you typically tend to evaluate Magic cards, this is just a bad card. But I hope it does something. Up next is Black Market Tycoon. I actually don't think this card is bad. And how could I? It's a cat in a suit. They put it in a little suit. He looks so precious. It's 2 mana, a green and a red for a 2/2 cat rogue. At the beginning of your upkeep, Black Market Tycoon deals 2 damage to you for each treasure token you control. And you can tap it to create a treasure token. Do you see? As far as 2 mana ramp guys go, it's not bad. I could see it with things that want a bunch of artifacts in play. I could see it in the Magda deck that wants a bunch of treasure tokens. It makes one every single turn, so that's neat. Obviously, it's decent with Goldspan Dragon because it's basically taps to make 2 mana. So it's a fine card that will probably see some amount of play. Speaking of that, a card that's probably not worth going on about, but like people are freaking out about, here's Topiary Stomper. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 green for 4/4 plant dinosaur. Here's the dinosaur, everybody. And it's got Vigilance. When Topiary Stomper enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tap, then shuffle. Stomper can't attack or block unless you control 7 or more lands. So, cute way to sneak a dinosaur onto our plane. It's a Topiary. It's very neat, but one way or the other, I commend whoever came up with this idea, from a design perspective. But I do like this card. I don't want to give you the impression off the bat here that I don't like this card. I do, actually. Just like the last card. I think it's a fine card that may show up from time to time, but probably isn't like a world-ending, incredible Magic card. It's a real like 7 and a quarter, somewhere along there. I also think, by the way, that in the 3 and 4 color decks that might want to play a card like this, it's not as good because it's difficult to cast, right? It's probably restricted to 3 color decks at the most that are very heavy green. And that I'm not as excited about, but when you compare it to a lot of the other like 3 mana green go get a land things that we have access to right now, it's actually really good. There's actually not that many things beyond like the thing that go grabs a forest and learns. That's what the mechanic is. That go and get a land on turn 3. This actually does, and that could be good for certain decks like Landfall, whatever. Waking the Trolls, decks that want a high land count on a certain turn. So, I don't know. I do think this is relevant. I do think this will probably see some amount of play, and it's better than a lot of the options we have that are similar. So, I like it. But I don't think it's incredible, even though I've spoken positively about it for the last 2.5 minutes. Let's look at Hostile Takeover next. This is 2, a blue, a black, and a red, 2 in Grixis, for a sorcery. Up to 1 target creature has base power and toughness 1/1 till end of turn. Up to 1 other target creature has base power and toughness 4/4 till end of turn. Then Hostile Takeover deals 3 damage to each creature. So this is a really neat way to get a one-sided board wipe. Like make your 3/3 that you'd like to keep able to survive this wipe. And then you get to attack with it, which is really kind of neat too. I like that. And you can also, in the meantime, make their like 7/7 or whatever a 1/1. So you make their biggest creature also die to your board wipe. All of this is really neat, but I'm still a little skeptical of 5 mana for 3 damage to everything at sorcery speed in this environment where we see plenty of 4/4s and stuff. So I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of tokens decks. There are a bunch of tokensy decksies out there, right? So this could clean up a bunch of stuff in Standard. But is it better than a Meathook Massacre a lot of the time? I'm not too sure, actually. In your Grixis deck, this could be a really, really cool sweeper to play. So I want it. This is one of those where I want to try it out. But for my money, I think the better sweeper is Depopulate. This is just a 4 mana. It's Wrath of God, right? 4 mana, 2 and 2 white, 4 sorcery, destroy all creatures. However, anybody that has a multicolored creature gets to draw a card. So it's reminiscent of Shatter the Sky, although it's hard to say on which of these cards the condition will be met more. I imagine Shatter the Sky draws the card more often. This, actually, I think will probably draw the card about as often in this format. In this particular Standard environment, it'll probably draw a card for your opponent about as often as a Shatter. However, of course, you can also make it to where this draws you a card a good bit of the time, and I like that. So your standard 4-mana sweeper, in a lot of ways. Your Wrath of God, but worse. Gives the opponent card advantage, Wrath of God. So they've been doing a lot of those lately, and I think they've hit a pretty good mark with this one. The card will almost certainly see play in Standard. You know, there was a point where the sweeper, the 4-mana sweeper, the Wrath of God of the set would have been the last card of the day, but we've actually got a bunch of cards left to talk about that I think are much more worthy of talking about than that one. Let's look next at Unleash the Inferno, which may not kill all the creatures, but I think it's still really neat. This is 1 and Jund colors, a black, a red, and a green for an instant, which I do think is key here. Unleash the Inferno deals 7 damage to target creature or planeswalker. When it deals excess damage this way, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls with mana value less than or equal to the amount of excess damage. So, kind of neat, right? If your opponent has a planeswalker on relatively low health or low loyalty, then this can blow away their Lolth that made the spiders and thus is at 1 loyalty, and also blow away their wedding announcement at the same time, and that's very good. You'll probably pick up a random treasure token a lot of the time with this, force them to sack it or something. So you'll at least have that, right? There's also the line where you kill a cat from an Asika's chariot, and then you blow up the chariot with the excess damage. That's probably an important line in the Standard too. So I'm not taking anything away from this card, but I still have this nagging thought in my head that's like, well, you wouldn't play a 4-mana instant speed destroy target creature. You wouldn't do that. The good news is this card is not that. My brain is trying to simplify it in a way that is not a good comparison. So I actually think this is a very sweet card for Jund decks, instant Riveteers decks. I'm never going to call it that. This is a great card for Jund decks in Standard to probably play just like a 1 or 2 of in their main deck. 4 mana is still kind of a lot for this effect, but 2 for 1ing a lot of opponents in this environment is going to be more than worth playing this card. But up next, let's look at Corpse Cleaner here. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 black for a 3/3 Death Touch. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, Body Cleaner connives. It says Body Cleaner in the translation. I think it's actually supposed to be Corpse Cleaner. Whenever Corpse Cleaner dies, return another target non-rogue creature card with equal or less power from your graveyard to the battlefield. So there are a lot of restrictions on this card. Another non-token, another non-rogue, right? But even with all those restrictions, I still think the card is pretty cool, right? 4 mana for a 3/3 is not where I want to be, even with a decent keyword ability. I do like Death Touch on a 4 mana 3/3, right? Because it's going to kill like 4 mana 5/5s. That's not terrible, right? But still. May even go in the black-green Death Touch deck pretty well. Help you draw into those fins and other important cards. I don't know. Connive is just a really cool ability. Having this on basically any creature, even at 4 mana, I think is a cool first line of text. Not Death Touch, but whenever another non-token creature you control dies, connive. This can get bigger as the game goes on, which is kind of neat. Churn through your deck. I mean, all the things about connive that are good on this card. But 4 mana is a lot, even for that first line of text, and that first line of text is nerfed in a couple ways I really don't like. Non-token is not cool, but probably has to be non-token or the card really would be broken, right? But the fact that it replaces itself is actually my favorite part about this card. A 4 mana 3/3 is not worth playing, but a 4 mana 3/3 that always trades in combat, no matter what it's blocking, no matter what blocks it, and then when it does trade, your opponent loses their guy, right? And you get a guy back. Really good card, I actually think here. Whether it's worth the 4 mana investment in a format where we have like Sorin for these decks, stuff like that, I'm not too sure, but this card has enough gas on it that I think it's definitely worth, more than worth, trying out in your decks. But whether it actually ends up making the cut at the end of tryouts, I'm not too sure, but I'm super excited to try the card. Another black creature that I'm excited about, and is getting a lot of press today, is Shakedown Heavy. This is just 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 6/4 Ogre Warrior with Menace. Half price for your Crawl Worm. That's neat. Whenever Shakedown Heavy attacks, defending player may have you draw a card. If they do, untap Shakedown Heavy and remove it from combat. So this is probably the best 3 mana big black creature that we've gotten since like Rotting Regisaur, and I think it might actually be just better than Rotting Regisaur. I really do. Now, if you're playing like Reanimator or something, it's not better than Reggie, but it's still so good. Like, if they want to contend with a 6/4 Menace on turn 2, I guess or on turn 4 rather, I guess they can. But if they don't want to do that, you get to draw a card and you get to block with it, which is just, that seems really, really good to me. I mean, I want to try this in mono black aggro like yesterday. I want to try this in mono black aggro, which is a deck that's been picking up pieces every now and again. Now I'm very excited. If you can't tell, my cadence has increased talking about this card, because boy, I cannot wait to blast some butts with this thing. I mean, shake some fools down, draw some cards, get some. I can't even really, go into tech or anything about this card. It's just like super obviously kind of decent. The rate is very, very good. It even gets a keyword ability. It's unboltable. It's very difficult for some removal spells to deal with in standard. It can still be vanishing versed or whatever, but I can't help but love this thing. 3 mana, 6/4, no real downside. I mean, it looks like a downside. It's not. It kind of reminds me of like a Clackbridge Troll, but actually standard playable. I think they fixed Clackbridge Troll to be playable. Fixed it in the good way like you want. So I really can't wait to get my hands on this thing. I don't think it's going to be one of the best cards in the set or anything, but I do think that it fits into a niche deck, mono black aggro, that's trying to do some cool stuff right now. And this probably enables the deck to at least attempt, at least reach for the stars, more so than it does now. So I don't know. I like it a lot. Can't wait to shake some fools down. But boy, probably the card that everyone's freaking out the most about today, for good reason, is Luxia, Giada's Gift. This is just 1 mana for a legendary equipment that equips for 3, or you see, you can equip a Planeswalker for 1. That will become more explained very shortly. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each counter on it. Do you see? Equipped permanent isn't a Planeswalker and is a creature in addition to its other types, but its loyalty abilities can still be activated. That's kind of neat. So in these like Esper and Black-White, and I'm sure, Grixis and Mardu Planeswalker decks that we're going to see in the upcoming format, this is a neat little finisher. All right, you can sweep the board as many times as you want with this on the table, and then eventually just equip it to your Planeswalker, equip it to your Wrenn or your Loth or whatever, and swing for big chunks, 4 or 5 at a time. So I think that this is really, really neat just for its standard playability, and for that matter, for its commander sort of. Planeswalkers aren't usually great in Commander, and this doesn't outright make them great in Commander, but I don't know. I at least want to try it, one way or the other. In Standard, fine card for already existing decks, but in other formats, people have already figured out like the infinite combos, like the old Devoted Druid. There's an infinite combo with Devoted Druid every spoiler season, but this time around, you can technically get it on like turn 3. Yeah, you can play this on 1, Devoted Druid on 2, then on 3, just equip this to Devoted Druid, and suddenly, infinite mana for you, my friend, because, your Devoted Druid will get a +1/+1 counter for each, or we'll get +1/+1 for each counter on it. So when it puts the -1/-1 counter on it to untap, it'll get +1/+1 for that counter. So you just infinitely untap it and create mana. So infinite mana on turn 3 in Modern. Let's go. Seems neat. So a lot of cool things about this card right here, but obviously I'm most excited for it in Standard, where I do think the card will do some cool stuff. Also, yes, the creature gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on it. That's interesting to think about, to say the least. So a lot I like about this. There's a reason it's in the top 3 cards of the day, in case you didn't know that that's where we were, but we are, sir or madam. So let's next talk about a card that actually isn't getting all the press that I think it should be getting, and that is Toluz. Toluz Clever Conductor is 3 mana. That's difficult to say. You have to spend a blue mana on it. But then it's a hybrid white and blue, and then a hybrid black and blue. So can go in a mono blue deck. I want to point that out. But this is a legendary human rogue. It's a 3/1, and when it enters the battlefield, it connives. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, exile them from your graveyard. When Toluz dies, put the cards exiled with it into their owner's hand. That's sick. It's so good. I mean, it immediately connives. So it'll put a card into exile when it connives. And then when it dies, whether it's to a sacrifice, a removal spell, or to combat, it's just a 3/1, so it'll trade. You get all those cards back. So the more turns it's in play, the better. The more things you discard, the better, technically. You know, in like a Reanimator deck, you don't want to have this because he'll exile all the things that you would really rather dump into your yard. But let's say in a control deck or just a deck that wants the value. Value is a good thing, right? That's a Magic the Gathering principle. You can play like Faithful Mending alongside this to really, really good effect because it's not like you ever lost the cards you discarded. They go back into your hand eventually. This also can't be Vanishing Versed, so a little bit of protection from some of the exile stuff in the format. I think that's important, but one way or the other, just a 3-mana, 3/1 that connives when it ETBs, probably good enough. Like this can be a 3-mana 4/2 that draws a card, kind of. That's great. It blinks pretty well, you know. Again, even if all it does is trade in combat and get you the thing back that you discarded to connive, that's good too. And even on the floor of it, well, at the floor of it, you get nothing. You know, even away from the ceiling of it, you might get 2 or 3 cards back when this dies, and that is really good gas. So I just don't know why more people aren't talking about it. To me, it's the number 2 card of the day. I'm excited. But it's time for our final card of the day. Here's Obscura Interceptor. I am scared of this card. This is 4 mana, 1, a white, a blue, and a black, Esper colors, for a 3/1 Cephalid Wizard with Flash and Lifelink. When Obscura Interceptor enters the battlefield, it connives. When it connives this way, return up to 1 target spell to its owner's hand. So it's not Spell Queller, but it's also not necessarily Venser. It's probably closer to Venser, though. However, Venser doesn't like draw a card when it comes into play or enable graveyard strategies, reanimation, or anything like that. This does it all, man. 4 mana, Flash, good abilities, Lifelink just stays tacked onto the card, so it ambushes pseudo well, right? It doesn't counter the spell, but as we've seen time and time again, memory lapse. It doesn't return the spell to the hand, but one way or the other. Remand's always been a good card. Divide by 0 was just banned in Standard. You know, returning a spell to its owner's hand is very good a lot of the time. And like, even though Overcharged Amalgam hasn't seen much play in this Standard, and it counters stuff straight up, I still think this is very much worth looking at. Really, I think that this is almost certainly, if not the most, then definitely one of the most impactful cards of the day. I've always liked, you know, Mystic Snakes. 4 mana things that counter a spell, and also have bodies and flash and stuff. So I'm always kind of a sucker for these, and maybe I rate them too highly. We've had one in Standard for a while that hasn't really had much effect on the format, but that one has to sacrifice a creature. This one doesn't have to do anything and gets you this incredible tempo. Not only does the opponent have to, you know, recast the spell next turn, usually you're time walking your opponent when you cast this, but you get a 3/1 with a very, very good, you know, keyword ability that also draws you a card when it ETBs. You may have to discard a card, but it still draws you a card deeper into your deck, and that is very good. Like, all of those things on one: counter target spell, draw and discard, counter target spell, loot on a body, it's not even I know it's not, I know, guys. I know it's not counter target spell, but like, divide by 0 and loot and a body, it's just, to me, that's just a little too stacked in a lot of ways. That's why I'm scared of this card more than I am celebrating it. You've heard me gush about cards for the last 10 minutes here. Like, oh, a really good card. I like this card. I like it a lot. It's a good card. I can't wait to blah, blah, blah. This isn't necessarily one of those. It's one of those I'm a little bit more apprehensive about its existence in the first place. But I don't think it breaks anything. But, man, between this and Make Disappear, I am going to hate seeing an island on the other side of the table on turn 1 in Standard for the next couple of years. Just, I want to say I'm a big fan, but it's really more that I am terrified. But that is it, officially now. That is the cards from today. Let me know how you felt about the takes down there in the comments section, and do all the YouTube stuff. You know, like the video, share it around any way that you can if people still do that in 2022. Even if people don't, maybe this one time, just help me out. Aside from that, sub, if you haven't done that yet, if people still do that on YouTube in the year 2022. Aside from that, you can check me out at twitch.tv/SBMTGDev. I'm over there playing Magic, and when I'm not playing Magic, I'm reviewing preview cards as soon as I get the internet back. I'm still using the hotspot, guys. I still don't have the internet. So as soon as I get the internet back, we will stream. I promise you. Don't unsub yet. Follow me over there. It's free to do that on Twitch. And aside from that, you can check out the Patreon at patreon.com/SBMTG. $1 a month to vote on what decks and lists and stuff we do. first for a new Capenna season. So do that. I am not a very good pitch man for myself, but links to all this stuff in the description, as well as all the spoiler videos that we've done so far. You'll find them down there. Wealth of things. But I'm going to get out of here and edit this video because I think I've been going on for like 5 hours at this point. It's going to be a long one to edit, y'all. But I love you one way or the other. And I will catch you cats. I said it again. I've got to break myself of saying one way or the other. It doesn't matter that I do love you. And I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.